are all about. So at the end, if you see or feel an urgent question, please ask it as we're going forward. Why don't you do this? Go ahead. So, yeah, that's kind of, when I show this at schools, the kids all say, "Oh, it's a bad hair day." This is one of my favorite shots of eagles. This answers a lot of the questions that people have about this age distinction of eagles. I'm in your road, aren't I? Sorry about that. Of course, the one in the center is the adult with the white head and tail. Doesn't get this nice pure white head and tail until the 5th and 6th year, really 6th. The one on the left is a juvenile bird, or a bird of the first year. It's kind of uniformly dark. Up until now, they tend to be even a little darker, but they're bleaching every day in the sun. And they come out by November, December, January. Look, this was a December photograph, and it's getting a little lighter every day because they're bleaching out. The bird on the right, that's a 3-year-old bird. And they go through this mottling stage from 2nd to 3rd to 4th year. But the 4th year, they get totally dark on the body like the adults do. And then on the 5th year, they get the white head. But the 3 easy classes are the juvenile birds of the year, which are kind of uniform. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year, 2nd and 3rd year birds in particular are mottled, and particularly have a light breast and a darker top and bottom from the breast. And then 4th year, they start to go dark, and they begin to get a little bit of a crown. And then from 5 onward, they begin to get this white head and tail. So it's kind of a nice look. Mike and Diane in here? Well, no, okay. Well, they took that photo. And it's right outside their house in Vancouver, at the Vanier Park. There's a pair of eagles that nest in the park, and their favorite perch, and particularly their favorite copulation perch, is this totem pole of the natives. And it's kind of neat. It's not a carved eagle sitting on a totem pole. This is a real eagle sitting on a carved totem pole. Kind of nice, right? One of Vancouver's 19 nesting pairs. And there it is again from the side on the same pole. Unfortunately, poles were meant for eagles to sit on, and they tend to crap on it, and unfortunately they're not doing well for the pole. In fact, next week they're slated to take the pole down because it's been rotting from the inside out. There's another kind of nice mature eagle. Now, this is not an eagle, but this is a bird. If you came up this valley in the summertime, you would see this bird all through the valley. It's a turkey vulture. It's big. It looks the size of an eagle, but it always soars with its wings at an angle. Eagles always soar with their wings flat, right on the horizontal. So this is truly a bird with a bald head, where the bald eagle has feathers on its head. This is going to be the 3rd year that turkey vultures have been wintering in our region, but particularly on the Gulf Islands.
Thanks a lot, thanks.
Until 3 years ago, there was no record of them. They all went south for the winter, but as the climate is shifting, these birds, like everything else, is shifting with it. And so now we're getting this turkey vultures, which normally went to California and Mexico. Some of them are now wintering in British Columbia. But a big bird, it does nest up this valley right here. This is the other big bird on the right, the osprey, fishhawk. It has a wingspan almost the same size as eagles, but the bird only weighs 4.5 pounds. It's a very lightweight bird. There are 4 pairs of them nest right out here. One just south of the bridge, one just north of the bridge, another one, and the 4th one is right out here on the pylon. So there's 4 pairs nest in the valley right here. They only come in to this region and set up their territory once all these wintering eagles have left. They can't compete. They're wonderful fishermen, the world's best fishermen. They only eat live fish, but they can't compete against eagles. So they literally wait till all the northern birds have gone back to northern British Columbia, and they move in within a few days they set up their territory, rebuild their tiny nests, and lay their eggs and complete the cycle and get the heck out again. But they learn how to defend themselves against one or two pairs of eagles, because they will attack, but they can't attack 3,000 eagles, so they're just not going to make a living sitting out here right now, so they don't even try. They leave and they migrate a long way away. Maybe as far as the Baja, maybe as far as the Caribbean, we don't really know. This is the other big bird of the area. Bald eagle on the left and the golden eagle on the right. And I've been counting eagles in this area for a long time. And I have, in this area here, about 20-something years, and I've yet to see a golden eagle in the flats here. Now, there have been a few seen. Apparently 3 years ago, I guess it was, or 4. There was one that spent a bit of time here, but it didn't come in until about 2 weeks after the festival, and I missed seeing it. And we have down in Boundary Bay area, Vancouver, we've had one that's come there and wintered all the last 4 years. It usually comes in a bit later than this. In all likelihood, there'll be one in this year. But they're a common eagle across North America, particularly in the mountains. They're only a mammal and a bird killer. They don't eat fish. And so the ones that we get coming here are here to eat the ducks and not the fish. A much more dynamic hunting bird. The bald eagle is a scavenger. He'll spend his whole lifetime eating carcasses if he can find it. Anything to get out of work. The golden eagle is the other way around. It will eat carcasses. It will eat road kills, winter kills, but it predominantly kills fresh birds or fresh mammals. In this area, we don't have a lot of mammals, but the two closest breeding eagles, which are on San Juan Island, live there because of the rabbit population. That's just a close-up of a young bald eagle and the golden eagle. Well, if you get real keen, you'll want to look at these different plumages, and this is what I was trying to say. This is a first-year bird. It's starting. This is a bird probably photographed in early spring. It's not quite a whole year, and it's getting into its first change of plumage. It's just not quite a year old, but it's about to be. And they go through all these different plumages until they finally get, in the 5 years, they get white head, but a few brown feathers. The eye isn't quite as perfectly almond as it will be, and finally they get to this spectacular head. Quite a marvelous bird. Oh, for kids I talk about tools. Well, we all learn about tools. You have to have good eyes if you're going to be an eagle, and if I was to hold these fingers up and walk away from you, adaptation for a fish feeder is to have scaly talons. And of course, if you're a protein eater of any kind, you want a big hook beak to tear it apart. So that's an important thing. Most people probably don't think of the feathers as tools, but eagles without feathers don't fly very far. So it's a kind of important adaptation. And they're so important, and you can see on the end of this one, it's broken. And they do break, they wear out, and so there is a constant renewal of feathers, and it's called the molt. And they don't molt all their feathers every year, but they molt sequences of feathers. In fact, on this bird, you can see that this feather and this one are slightly different lengths than this one. This is an older feather from when the bird was probably 2 years, 3 years younger. And next time this feather drops out, it will come in shorter. Because the interesting thing about eagles is the day a young eagle leaves the nest, makes its first flight at about 84 days, 83, 84, 85 days, that eagle is bigger that day than it's ever going to be again in its life. So there's no such thing as a little eagle flying around, and not in terms of 5, 6, 7 pounds, 8 pounds, could be 9. Females are 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. I have a 14-pound, 8-ounce bird in my freezer that the game branch gave me, that they thought I should have it because it was such a big bird. Unique, great, huge female. And it is a juvenile. So its plumage lengths are going to be immense, but it's frozen, and I got it frozen. We haven't yet thought it out to measure its length. So here we are, beginning of life. The beginning of life. I mean, this is awesome, really. That female 10, 12 pounds, has to allow that male, who may be 7, 8, 9 pounds, on her back, and those killing talons centered in her back while they mate. So there's an incredible bond has to develop between these birds, and a trust. It just is, it's kind of awesome that one big killing predator allows the other to be on his back, but it has to work that way. So you can see, he may be small, but he's mouthy. And he's telling her to sit still. This is kind of neat. I took this photo way back in about 1963, and I was doing a survey for my thesis of eagles, and we didn't really have a good measure of how many eggs they laid. And we wanted to take 30, 40 nests and count. Well, I had a fixed wing float plane at the time, and I could fly past these nests no matter how close. I could knock pine cones, fir cones off the branches above the nest. I could never get a sitting eagle to stand up even. They don't care about fixed wings airplanes. They just don't care. And I couldn't get a look at a single, so I got a helicopter. Well, I got the Coast Guard. They came, and it was a guy I learned to fly with. And so he took me up. Well, eagles don't like helicopters. And so as we would get closer and closer, we were going pretty slowly because we knew they didn't like helicopters. And at about 200 yards, you can see the bird is getting uneasy. And at about 200 feet, she begins to stand up. And that's all we needed. There she was. I'm taking that picture, as a matter of fact, from that helicopter when somebody was below and took it. And you can then see the eggs underneath her, and then we just veer away, and she didn't even have to leave. Then she could settle down again. So they lay on an average, just about exactly 2 eggs. Occasionally they lay 3, and occasionally they lay 1. There are a few pairs of eagles elsewhere that have laid 4 eggs. Whether it's a dump nest, probably not. A dump nest when more than one female hen drops eggs in. It's possible, but probably not. It's possible that the genetics of a few birds allows them to lay 4 eggs. But we've never had a record of that here. Anyway, neat nest. That tree was cut down about 2 years after I took this photograph. And they counted the rings. That tree was 658 years old. And it wouldn't surprise me when you look at that big branch. I mean, the branch that this thing is sitting on, I mean, you see that eagle is that long, and that branch is about like that. It's certainly a huge tree. It's a spectacular tree. When I put the cameras in the nest, we had to get, Betty Ann hired a big crane to lift me up there, and it took a 202-foot crane to get me to the nest. And the nest measured exactly 176 feet from the nest to the ground. It's the highest nest I know of. So there are a few wondrous trees in this area, but not many left. That, just down the road here, is one of the great wondrous trees of the country. So, in the nest, you get this. That's what it's all about. They're going to build a nest. And here comes the male in, and he just beat his wife with a stick. Now, that's not become popular. It's got bad publicity lately. But the eagles often do it. They don't get out of the road, and they get clobbered by the mate bringing in a stick. But she's going to take care of it and blend that stick into the nest. Now, the male, much smaller, does bring in most of the branches. And interestingly enough, he can bring one in by himself. He can spend 30, 40 minutes placing that thing and trying to get it in the right, and the female will invariably walk right over to that stick and pick it up and put it on the other side of the nest. I mean, they're like another species we know about. So you go to all that work, you build a nest, and what do you build it for? Well, you build it for this, for the eggs. And what got me into putting cameras in eagles' nests is another chap put one in, took a video of it, and the camera was about this far from the eagle's beak. And as she was laying the eggs, she was lying there going, She did this 9 times, and then she stood up, and there she had an egg. So she went into labor just the same way. Well, I'm not sure it's the same way. I've never gone into labor. But I've been told. You just saw that exchange. The female got off the nest. The male came right in alongside of her, did not leave those eggs exposed for more than a few seconds, and then he stood over them and he rolled them. He put his beak down and he rolled those eggs, and that's a very intense movement. They do that every 2 to 3 hours so that the eggs roll over, and the fat, the protein, the fat part of the yolk doesn't just float to the surface, because on the top of the yolk is the embryonic tissue where it's starting to grow the embryo from. And if that was to keep floating to the surface and catch on the top, it would terminate the development. So all birds tend to rotate their eggs, and that keeps the yolk changing position, and the embryonic tissue that's starting doesn't get stuck to one place. Anyway, neat. This is a close-up. If you've watched our cameras, I know there's some of you in here who watch our cameras intently. You know, we let our people control the camera. They all have 20, 30 power magnification lenses. So you can zoom right in, and you can zoom this close to part of this is looking at a little piece
Thanks,
of one
Amanda.
of these eggs,
Thank
and
you.
that's the chick's beak sticking out where it's just broken through the surface. And he's about to hatch. Will you get good close-up? Oh, that mum, she just took possession of it and went over it and covered it up so it didn't get cold. So, or she was very shy, one or the other. Wrong direction. That direction. So that's what comes out. This is one I raised in an incubator. In fact, I think you see the male later in the picture, but he was a young bird that didn't make it. We picked him up off the beach, and I took him home, and he matured over the next 5 years, and I happened to have a female that I had to cut her wing off because she came in all gangrenous, and the two of them bred, and this egg, and I put it in an incubator, and this is it just now hatching. And there's how they hatch. That tiny little catch, it's not the tip of the beak, it's a tiny little egg tooth on the top part of the beak, and that's what scratched the hole in the shell and made it weak that the chick could get its beak out. And then it ran all the way around the edge, scratching the inside of the shell all the way around until it could break open and pop out. So that little tiny egg tooth, as insignificant as it might look, is essential for not only birds, reptiles have the same thing, to get out, to scratch their way out of a shell as well. Well, there's a couple of little fluff bags. Well, in this case, you're seeing one, but there are two. You'll see the other one in a moment. The female and the male are often digging in the nest, like you're seeing. And we think what they're doing is they're getting sticks out of the roads, because when they lay down, they don't want a stick sticking up into their tummy. There's the other when she'd been sitting on top of it. He says, "Oh, the sun does shine." Yeah. See, the camera moved. The people who control the cameras can move them big, wide, close in. In fact, they're closing in right now. So if you get to watch our cameras and you learned about the eagles, then we give you permission to go in and control the cameras. We're always looking. Oh. Yes. That bird you saw, I don't know if you noticed it, on the bird's leg was a band. And that's the bird from this nest that Betty Ann has right here. The band's on the other leg. That bird is now, I was starting to tell that story before, 7 days old. I think this one was actually 6. I just never got around to changing it when I figured it out. They come out of that shell, and you can kind of put your head back into this. There wasn't a lot of room in that shell. They were trying to develop a chick in there. So he didn't have a lot of feathers on his membrane across and cleans the eye. It's a moisture thing. It's our tear duct. It evolved from our tear duct. So our tear duct has become a windshield wiper. At least that's what the kids at school call this. Nictitating membrane is a bit of a mouthful, but windshield wiper certainly captures the function. And here we are, 9 weeks. possibly getting into the 10th week. That gray down has now been pushed out with feathers, and these are the contour or body feathers. This eagle is now full grown, body-wise. He's standing full height. His wings have now grown full. And you can think of this challenge. You can't grow this great, huge wing of feathers unless you got a place to hang them. So the first thing they do is they grow the bones and the feathers and the muscles.
Sorry, we have some interruptions sometimes, so be patient.
And then, as soon as it's got that full space, then they start to grow the feathers down. And this guy is starting to grow his wing feathers. And I've been in the nest. In this case, it was a nest.
Yes, it's live.
And he was sitting up pretty perky looking to start with. But after sitting looking at this monster climbing over the edge of his nest, he was getting tired and his wings just dropped. And the reason they dropped is he was tired, because every wing feather is growing and it's in the blood. And this is a shaft full of blood. So the body, the wing feathers, the wing itself is incredibly heavy. And so he can pull it up, make it look natural, but in a few minutes it's hanging down because it's just too much. Eventually, another about a week for those feathers, they're going to be fully grown. The body seals off that feather, sucks back up the blood and the juices, and reabsorbs it all back into the body, and you end up with a very, very light feather and a light wing, and in a sense, a light eagle. Except that all that energy from all those wing feathers at the same time, the tail feathers at the same time, that gives the bird a huge amount of energy in that last week of life. And that energy it now uses to do two things. It uses it to produce all the leg pantaloon feathers. It's had nothing except down, all down its leg. And so now the bird is full grown, its wings are hard, it can now sit there and pump and do all sorts of exercises, but it puts its energy into growing feathers it didn't need yet. And it does that with that last energy. And the second thing it does, it uses that energy to pump and do wings, because mom is going to, and dad are pretty soon going to quit feeding it. About 3 or 4 days before they fly, most of the wild eagles are finished being fed. They just don't get fed. And they need to get a little hungry, and they need to lose a bit of weight. They've now absorbed all that energy, and they put it into body fat. And body fat is not conducive to flying. So they drop that body weight, and about the 84th day, they learn to fly and make their first flight. And here they are. These two are just about ready to go. And the last thing, and particularly if you have a nest that's at the very top of a tree, then you're kind of lucky. You can practice all these helicopter flights. If you're in a tree with a lot of branches above it, it's not quite so good for practicing helicopter flights. And some of the birds that do have crowded nests with branches above them, we think are not quite as successful because they don't get the practice in landing. And it's particularly important on that first flight you'll land properly.
Don't worry about it.
Land in shrubbery that you can't get out of. So, real big hazardous moment for an eagle is when it makes those first flight. Does it succeed in landing on an open branch somewhere that it can take off from again? And here this guy goes and he lands on a stump. Pretty good. And that was a first flight for it. It landed on the top of a tree. And she went from the top of that tree to another tree, and in 5 or 6 more days, she was really quite experienced and a good flyer. This guy never left the beach. This was the wrong position. He wanted to be up somewhere to get a bit of a jumping start. And so after 3 weeks of him being on the ground, almost 3 weeks, the female, the parents had abandoned the chicks after about a week. Another few days went by and the female chick left the territory, so that just left him for another week on the beach, and we took pity on him and went and picked him up. And as I say, we took him home and he matured and produced eaglets. Oh, that's the little float plane I had years ago. That always brings back fine memories. There's 3 eaglets. Yeah, the eagles. These I had caught it with a net, and it was a seal carcass, and they were feeding on it. I put a net out over and got 3 eagles, and I wrapped them up ready to band and mark them and so on. In fact, in those days we were putting VHS transmitters on them. We're going to put them on eagles shortly, and we really want to answer some of the questions that like you people were asking at the beginning, where do these birds go and where do they come back to and so on. So we're just about to embark on that. Oh, they're all wrapped. It's kind of neat. When you're handling eels, you catch a bunch at the same time. You just take your wife's bath towel and wrap them around them and put a pin in them and stack them up, because once their wings are they're wrapped up like that, they can't do anything to hurt themselves. That's always the key when you're a biologist. You're trapping, whether it's a mountain goat or whatever on earth it is, you got to make so sure the animal can't hurt itself. And wrapping these eagles up in a towel, they just sit there like they're stacked with cordwood, because there's nothing they can do to hurt themselves. If you go to stroke them, they might bite you, but ironically, most eagles wouldn't bite you. Now, some would, so I'm warning you about that. Some would, but most eagles wouldn't even bite. Their beak is not what they kill with. They kill with their feet. And so if they could get their feet at you, they're going to nab you. But biting doesn't even fit into the vocabulary of some eagles. So there was this kid I used to know, and he was measuring one, because at that stage we were taking DNA and blood samples, I should say. It wasn't DNA, but we were determining the sex and the measurements to get the range and so on of eagles, because we didn't know that yet. So here we are, male and female. The male is so much smaller than the female, really, but that's a pair. So this is the challenge you face. When you look at them, they're not always nearly as obvious as to which is which, even though there's probably 40–50% difference in body weight. You don't necessarily get to see this at a distance unless the birds are exactly at the same perspective and so on. Then sometimes you can see this distinction, but otherwise darn difficult to tell the male from the female. Oh dear. This is a story I generally don't bother telling anymore, but I know there's a few Americans in the audience, and well, most of them will have heard this. I'm going to tell it again. It's a dismal story, but it's a good story. As I was growing up, particularly in the 50s, eagles were considered vermin, and most predators were considered vermin. Hawks, falcons, eagles, coyotes, bears were vermin. They were something that competed with human beings, and they were all killed. Vermin was bad. Kill them. That's how they sold guns, how they sold ammunition, how they sold scopes. Today they just do it to kill people. But in those days they killed eagles. But now America has changed to shooting people. At least that's better than shooting eagles. Yeah, I'm not even going to add to that. When I started my thesis, in fact, one of my first flights when I was 15, learning to fly, I was practicing putting the hours in for my pilot's license, and I realized every island in the Gulf Islands, I lived in Victoria and I flew out of Victoria Airport, all the Gulf Islands on the Canadian side had eagles.
It's
every
okay,
mile.
I read your questions, okay? I'll try and answer them later.
To the to the American islands, because nobody stopped you in those days, and there wasn't a single eagle nesting on the American islands. I couldn't understand this. It made no sense. There were nests on occasion, but nothing in them. So the day I became 16, my father let me take his car, and I went across to Blaine, Washington, which is kind of almost where I live now in Surrey. And there on the first boats I went to was the answer. The fish boats, all had buckets in the back. And they would shoot the eagles, cut off the legs, because if they could fill up that bucket full of eagle legs and take them back to Alaska, they could pay almost the whole gasoline cost of driving to Alaska, because gasoline, as you may know, was 25, no, you don't know, it was 25 cents a gallon in those days. So it was a bit different than, so $2 for a pair of eagles, you got 4 gallons of gas. So it didn't take very many eagles, and you paid your way all the way back to Alaska. Fortunately, thank God, we changed the attitude, and this is the only thing that today gives me some kind of hope about conservation. We can change attitudes, and we changed the attitude that predators are not bad, they're good, essential, and they're a necessary component of the ecosystem. And so today, almost all predators are protected. What's vermin today are rats and mice. But in those days, it was eagles and falcons and coyotes and so on. So we've come a long way. We can change our attitude. We just have some big steps yet to take in this attitude about living harmoniously together in a ecologically sustainable environment. So this was a bird that was a couple of years, a few years, 5 years after the $2 bounty was taken off, and there was still a hangover of resentment to some predators. And this was an area up on what is today the Great Bear Rainforest, where I had one of my study areas, and I found 17 dead eagles in the same spot. So somebody was still harboring a grudge. They didn't do anything, they just shot them and left them. Anyway, there we are. And this is another challenge today. The Americans, of course, know Bill Clinton. And every president of the United States on his last day in office gets to do a couple of, without debate in the Senate or the House, gets to proclaim a couple of laws that are the kind of the parts or eagles are to be given to the native people. Well, it's funny how some things change just by a slip of the tongue. Because up to that point, all the headdresses, traditional headdresses of North American Indians, were either golden eagle feathers or turkey feathers. They didn't use bald eagle feathers. But today, well, it's the tradition. This is at the, now the young bucks say, it's the tradition that we use bald eagle feathers. But that tradition goes back to the day that President Clinton proclaimed that law, and all the eagle feathers and eagle carcasses went to the native. Before that, they didn't use bald eagles. But now it's hard to explain this to the young bucks. So bald eagle feathers are now treasured by the native dancers. Some of them, particularly on the American side, they're much more careful about how they get their eagles or the feathers and controlling them. Here, we're a little less, more lax, and you're not supposed to kill eagles for their feathers, but there's more of a trafficking of eagles in Canada. And they're either sold to the native dancers in the United States somehow, or they're sent to Europe. And interestingly enough, you think, and I thought, that powwow dancing was a North American Indian thing, and it is, except that during the war, one German author wrote 64 books about the Northwest, or about the Indians of the Western Plains. Every one of these little tales, cowboy and Indian tales, ended up with the resolution of that story with the native Indians doing a powwow dance around a fire and smoking a peace pipe. And so what it built into that whole generation, my age of people and a little bit older during the war, who thought of the peace pipe and the headdress as one great icon of freedom. They were going to get away from Europe and come to America. And so the big market for headdresses happens to be in Europe because of the culture of these 64 books that were written so long ago. So today, there's more of a market of selling feathers to the black market in Europe than there is even in North America. Kind of a funny twist. Sometimes they use golden eagles. That's a golden eagle that's been dehydrated. So we had a big, many of you may remember, about 5-6 years ago, we had a big challenge here in the valley in Vancouver. 26 or something eagles were found. They figured with the records they found that a group of natives had killed about 500 eagles. And that was discouraged. And it turns out that two of the members of that cartel, or whatever you want to call it, group of natives that were doing this, came from this reserve right here. And they were banished by the tribe. They were kicked off the reserve. And the lady in the background here, right there, the Grand Chief, Dr. Rose Charlie, did a wonderful thing. She stood up and said in court, and helped get them all convicted, that there was no historical record of the native peoples of the Northwest Coast killing eagles for their feathers. There was this record of the big headdresses, but they were all golden eagle feather or turkey. Here we didn't do that. She had 7 eagle feathers, and it's quite legal for you or I or the natives to have an eagle feather in Canada, or in British Columbia, at least. And she had 7, but she'd taken all her life to find those 7 nice feathers along the river, and she treasured them, and that was the meaning. She'd found them and she treasured them, and they were her connection to the spirit world. And so it kind of established in principle and in court that natives do not have the right to just wantonly kill eagles. Oh, that was the Grand Chief, Rose Charlie. Our foundation took her on a tour. We put together a program for her and took her to all the native schools in the valley and all the native schools on the island to get this message across. She talked about native rights and obligations, and I talked about the biology of eagles. Well, there's a really kind of interesting thing. This little tiny freighter is about the length of this boat, just about the width of the big super tankers today. And this is one that went down in Barkley Sound.
Blocking the screen with your laptop.
Oh, my laptop, sorry. Yeah,
Oh, no,
it's miles from there.
Oh, that's a story. I don't know where that comes from. Oh, it's the picture.
It must be. You're complaining. Damn photographers. They're complaining about my pictures. That was a picture I took before you were born. No, thank you. I don't know what. I'm taking this out of the airplane at the time. And it may be the side of the airplane or my passenger in the road. Sorry. Anyway, what is fascinating about this, this is showing that's the oil that was just from that little tiny tanker, and it worked its way through Barkley Sound, and every bird, every otter, anything that came in contact with any of that light oil was just, of course, killed. And as some of you may remember, the Exxon Valdez in Alaska. Well, that's 23 years ago now, and on the 19th year, time goes so quickly, it's now 3 or 4 years ago. On the 19th year, Exxon company got out of paying a single cent of damage. They fought for 19 years. They were charged and convicted of, because their captain was drunk and in bed. And when he gave the wheel of this freighter to a guy who knew nothing about navigation, and he rode it up on a rock. And Exxon got out of every single penny of that damages that were awarded against them. It took them 19 years, but they fought it and they got out of every penny of it. So when we lose the tanker out here, the oil companies are going to get out of ever paying a cent. The answer is don't allow any tankers any more than we have to on the Salish Sea. So I am not a tanker fan. I am not an oil fan. In fact, today in my mailbox, I have a book that I have funded to be produced about Kinder Morgan, the most horrendous group of horrible people in the world, putting in a pipeline. And we're hoping to have that book out shortly. It's about the same. Mr. Kinder is the same guy who brought down Enron in the United States, the biggest scam in the American world, the world of fraud. And he got away with it, and he's now running the pipelines in Canada. This does not make sense for Canada to be allowing this to happen, for other people to pollute our land. Yeah, it's a horrendous thing. Anyway, I get too upset. So ecotourism, a good alternative. You're part of ecotourism. You've come here to see what it is that our land offers. And here, by God, here right on the Harrison River, greatest salmon river in Canada and the greatest eagle river in Canada for the exact same reasons. We have one common item. We have good, clean, pure water coming down those rivers. There's almost no agriculture. There's almost no mines. And so our water is still relatively pure. And with good water, you can raise good salmon. You can raise eagles. You can raise people and the whole thing. But without good water, you can't do any of this. So ecotourism, in my way of thinking, is about the yous getting out there and understanding this message and telling it to somebody else. Oh, neat. This is one of our friends, and this is an ecotourism. This is off a tourist boat in Alaska, Ketchikan. The guy goes out and he feeds some eagles herring every day, early in the season. They only do it early, because as soon as the salmon come into the rivers, the eagles don't want old frozen herring, they want salmon. But early on, he does this. And if you ever go to Ketchikan, go out on the Bering Sea crab boat. But you got to go in the early April or May. By the end of June, salmon are coming into the Ketchikan River, and they all abandon old frozen herring. Kind of neat. This is a boat that's been converted to tourism, and it demonstrates all the different fishing formats. Yeah, he can't throw them out fast enough. And some of them are coming through the guy wires of the boat almost. I mean, it's pretty spectacular. Kind of neat. And he does this on this island where, in Alaska, the only state where you can't feed eagles. But of course, this is a native island, and they aren't subject to the laws of the United States, so they can do this on that island. I mean, personally, I have nothing against people feeding eagles. We've taken all their bloody food away from them. I mean, why should we not try to give them something? At least leaving some of these carcasses out here for them, we're giving them, in a sense, something that was rightfully theirs. So I personally don't see any great harm in us putting, I mean, if it was 150 years ago, all along our beach zone here would be a dead seal and a dead whale and a dead sea lion. They would just be naturally dying, and they would all be, but we don't have any of that anymore. And if there is one washed up on a beach somewhere, people have to haul it away because they don't want to smell it. But that's all natural eagle food, and we've just simply have eliminated it all. So another part of ecotourism is, of course, what you have here. I started going to the Brackendale tour at Brackendale, started the first Eagle Festival. Marvelous man. And well, he says that they have the world's largest group of eagles. It's a fraction of what we have here. But I tease Tor about that. But I mean, it's the truth, because we get many more here. But he has done wonders in getting a big preserve up there, and hopefully many of their eagles will come back. It's not likely going to come back to what we ever have here, because this river has probably 10 times the salmon in it that the Squamish mamgram does. That's Tor. Great friend, in fact. He's sometimes comes out. Are you in the room? No. He sometimes comes here, so I didn't know. He sometimes surprises me. So I have to say nice things about him in case he's here. Yeah, that's up the Squamish. So here we are. These are just a few shots from around here, and they're probably taken by Christians, some of these. So, oh, that's one from Alaska. I know that because there's what do you call it? Magpie. We don't have magpies here. But on the coast of Alaska, you get magpies, which is interesting. I mean, this is very typical. As I said, today, when I did the count, there was 2,274 that I counted. There's probably 3,000 out there, 2,500, 3,000. And hopefully, within another month, there'll be another 5,000, 10,000 more easily. So we're just so blessed to have this incredible resource. Now, the photographer of this is Mike Stefiak, who's at our little exhibit hall down by Kilby, and he sells prints. He's done marvelous. He lives in Coquitlam, and just down below him is the oh, I can't think of the name of the river. It comes to my mind in a minute. You know. Anyway, one day he went down there and he catches this coyote chasing down, and there's a whole sequence of it, chasing down and catching fish. The next day he went down and he gets a bobcat chasing fish and catching. The next day he gets down and it's a black bear catching fish. And this is in the city. So, no, the one in Coquitlam. The, what's it called? No, no, this side of it. No. Hi, now I hear that is Miles. I see a silhouette there. It's Miles. Hi, Miles. No. It's the same name as, I always confuse it with. No. Anyway, this owl, they were here on our eagle release. This is not that eagle that we released this week. In fact, it was, this is simply a different eagle. All our eagles for the eagle release come from owl, because almost all the eagles that get into difficulty, they get electrocuted, they hit cars, they get poisoned, anything happens to them, they get taken to the big rehab center in Delta. And then if they can be treated effectively, they are, and they're released. And we try to release many of them, either back where they were found, but if it's the wrong time of year, you can't send an eagle to a place where they shouldn't be. So they usually bring them out here, because this is where almost all eagles are going to come anyway. I mean, at this time of year, if you're going to release them now, release them here, because this is the best place in the world for eagles to both find dinner, but also to socialize. Yeah, I could have taken that photo this morning, because we were out on the boat, and we were right by that same pole, and I had two eagles sitting on it again. And this one happens to be a shot where I was taking the picture in the front of the tour boat, but it was a previous year, and a kayaker was going by me, and he took the photo of us. So kind of neat. And if you haven't been out on a Fraser River tour, you should do it, because this morning we saw at least 2,000 of the eagles were from the boat. It's the best way of seeing them. This is our tower. It's right out here. It fell over. We had a $12,000, $11,800 fuel cell on it to produce the power to drive two cameras on the top. But unfortunately, it either toppled over, got toppled, and the fuel cell was gone, and both cameras were broken. So at the moment, that tower is still lying on its side, but the intent is we just need another $20,000. So if anybody here has an extra $20,000 cash, it's about 20 grand to put the fuel cell and two good cameras. And the images from those cameras are well, I have some here. It's kind of awesome. This is taken from the tower, looking at one of them sitting on the tower, and he's about 8 feet from the camera lens. Sometimes they're closer. And that's one that's been sitting out in the rain for about 4 hours, and he's looking a little disheveled, but he'll dry out. He'll dry out. Now, sometimes you have the cameras. We also have them on the river up here underwater, and when you get underwater cameras, you sometimes find the unexpected. We were watching the salmon going by. In this case, it's a dead salmon, and it's just drifting downstream. And this is a group of Barrow's goldeneyes that are just tearing this salmon apart and eating it. Up until we had this film, the sea duck biologist had never actually seen sea ducks tearing apart salmon. It's kind of a fascinating shot. They're just stripping this thing right out. We have another sequence the same, but in that case it's mergansers doing the same thing. So sometimes you get the unexpected. Sometimes we'd see a seal going by, even in the shallow waters. So, neat. I mean, this is the trees out here today. Unfortunately, you can see there's 3 trees. One on the left, one of them with only a branch on the right. Both those trees have fallen. They fell last winter and the winter before. Today, the center tree had 49 eagles on it when we were out there. Or at least that's what I counted. I don't know, it must be darn near that many now. But we're going to lose that tree too, because it's dead. So, just some shots from various of the photographers, probably from Christian, who's sitting right here, are you doing a live broadcast? What are you doing?
You're live, yeah.
Oh, I'm live. Oh, well, nobody would ever believe it. I'm getting too old. But anyway, well, hello, Christian's audience.
Well, you got some questions.
Yeah. Okay. So this is one. I mean, that last shot is kind of almost anybody who walked down the trail right here saw that exact shot today, because there was several eagles in that tree just above us, and they look kind of neat. This is a really interesting photograph. I took it. It was a few years ago. When it was just the right day to see it. This is a bubbles of air. They're often, if they're bubbles from the ground, they're called thermals. If you get a gust of wind coming in on hitting a bluff or a mountainside or a break of trees, it sends the air up, and it does the same effect. It creates a column of rising air, or bubbles of rising air. And eagles see this. I think they personally have, like we have with the Doppler radar, I think they see moving air. I'm not sure, but boy, or it's moving. And of the three columns, the first one went due south, went right toward the Skagit River, and I could follow it with the binoculars, and they just about got to the border when I could no longer see them. So they were here feeding at 10 in the morning. They're probably going to have lunch on the Skagit. The second group went straight down the Fraser Valley west, and breakfast here and lunch at Boundary Bay. And the third group completely floored me. They went straight up and across the northwest, and I thought, where are they going? I went home and looked at, that's Brackendale. I never realized how close Brackendale is. It's, if you took a string and I went to Brackendale and went down, it's the same distance as it is to Boundary Bay. Yeah, from here. So it's 30, 40, depending how fast they're moving, maybe an hour of just circling and gliding. These birds move around. This is how they move on this moving escalator that gives them a free ride to Alaska and a free ride back. It's that air that's almost constantly coming off the Pacific and is going around this part of the world from west to east. It gets to the coast mountains and has no alternative. It has to go up 5,000 feet because there's a coast range from California to Alaska that pretty much demands it's going to push the air up 4,000 or 5,000 feet. And the eagles just put their wings out, up they go, and they glide downhill to Alaska. So they can move from here to Alaska literally without flapping a wing. And then they can turn around and ride the same escalator back south again. And that's how they move up and down the coast without really expanding a lot of energy. They're a kind of marvelously adapted bird. Oh, so I'm now going to give you a small advertisement about our cams. Have you ever, I know the number of you are from our cam watchers and our Hancock Wildlife Foundation viewers, but for those who aren't, this is a typical cam nest shot. I mean, this is one of our cams looking at the white rock nest. And in fact, Christian here did a whole book about this particular family, and it's quite marvelous. We're not quite sure what's going to happen this year, because I think there's a change of birds at this nest, we think, this year. Same as at this nest. The nest right here lost its male last year. I was telling it early in the day. And she's come back and brought a new male, we think, and they're standing at least on opposite sides of the nest looking at each other. So they're building up a confidence, because they got to get where she'll allow him on top. So it's going to take some confidence building. But this is a typical nest structure. This is cameras. It's just a wondrous introduction to nature, seeing this intimate detail of how these creatures so carefully, meticulously look after each other. It's just awesome. There's no other better word for it. And they're so gentle. Now,
sorry, sometimes we have some internet interruptions, so just hang on and be patient, okay? We're far out here, that's why.
To some people, there can be fratricide, where one chick will decide to kill another, and it's an adaptation, presumably, whereby if there's not enough food, at least one is going to quickly get most of the food and survive, and the other one's going to perish. At other times, we end up raising all three young, and they seem to be not very aggressive birds, and there's lots of food, and it either doesn't trigger the aggression or whatever it is. But most of our nests have been particularly successful. By the way, that bird is tearing up a pike minnow, I'm told. And they're a little predator fish that goes and can get very big, apparently. I was told today that a guy caught one that big, but most of them, when they bring in, are about this long, 5, 6, 7 inches. And that's one of the main sources of food. And that's a predator of the sockeye salmon and the coho and so on that spend a year and a half, 2 years in the river, are pike minnows. And so the eagles are also helping this balance by taking out the predators of the salmon. Anyway, neat, intimate looks. And if you go to our website, you'll see we have several cameras running. We have cameras from a lot of different things. Some years we've even had penguins on there. So the discovery of the Valley of Eagles, this was the poster we had a couple of years ago. The same Saturday, it was, no, this is the 18th and 19th, isn't it, today? Yeah, so it was the day difference then. Anyway, so there we are. If any of you have any more questions,
give me your questions, please. I'll be happy to convey some of them if I can. Okay.
We'll give it a second because some people have to rush off. I know that, so they're welcome to do that. Don't feel embarrassed. Just leave. We have you shot as you go over the stairwell because you become good eagle food. No. You saw a dead seagull.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, just go ahead. Okay, I'll ask on your behalf.
One time when I lost my airplane in a storm, I wasn't very enthused about eating seagull, and they don't appear to be either. But they do eat seagull, but they'll just as soon find garbage in a garbage dump or a 4-month-old dead salmon than eat a seagull. So that tells you something about gulls. Yeah.
Gentleman Ghost, that's a great question. I'll ask it for you. Just hang on. As soon as I can, I'll ask that, okay?
We have a lot of crows and a lot of ravens. And magpies are in the same group of birds. And magpies seem to favor areas that are drier. And that part of Alaska, ironically, leads out of the interior where it's much drier. Most of our magpies are in drier areas. So it may be there's fewer crows where there's magpies, because they're both very close together. There's ravens where there's magpies, but not generally a lot of ravens, crows, and magpies. Because the crow, not. Probably, but nobody has seen it that I know of. The swans are predominantly root eaters. And reed and stuff, but particularly shoots. They're digging the shoots up out of the ground.
Okay, that's the second question on the young. I got that. Okay, I'm going to just.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I got 2 questions here from the world. Okay.
From the world. Well, hi world.
so one of them is really interesting. It says, why do some birds of prey or raptors eat fish and others don't? I mean, where does this difference come from? An interesting question.
Boy, profound as well.
Profound, yes. I
mean, it really goes back to long-term in evolution where birds specialize to eat one kind of thing, and it's like the fish eagles are related to the golden eagles way back, but the fish eagles got really more scaly feet because they're oriented to eating fish, and the golden eagle has a different kind of claw structure and so on, better for catching birds and mammals. I mean, you evolve specialties, and that's really what's happened in all the predatory lines. They've evolved a specialty to somehow hone in. Some of them have feathers like the harriers, the marshhawk, where they can hear like owls, and they're focusing on the sound of mice in the grass, where others are finding mice by watching them and others by hearing them. So every species has adapted to certain specialties, and they hone down, they get more and more specialized to be more and more effective, because the prey is trying to do the same. It's trying to avoid being caught, so it's learning how to overcome that specialty. Yeah. And the next question?
The next question was, when the juveniles leave, how do they actually know where to go? The nest. That's a great question.
At lunch, I had dinner with a guy, and I thought he had a Ouija board, and that was one of the questions I was going to ask him. And no, that's the kind of question we want to. How? Well, no, you put the question differently. You put, how do they know? Well, the how is probably pretty straightforward. If they went to the wrong area and there was no food, they probably didn't survive. and they didn't leave any progeny. If they went to the right, if they went to where there was food, they could have a possibility of surviving and leaving progeny that learned to go that way. So that part is probably pretty straightforward. It's probably what drove distribution and migration. It was success versus not success. I mean, success in the sense of making a living, finding dinner, or not finding. If you didn't find dinner, you died. And then you don't leave offspring. Yes, there's a question over here.
Nesting pairs in this area.
I'll ask about, Amanda, I'll ask about the oldest eagle nest. That's a great question, okay? Just hang on, please. Sometimes the connection is not so great, so I apologize. I'm just doing my best here to whatever I can, okay?
There's one due north of here, about 3/4 of a mile, just across there. Now that's the latest one to come into the area, but 10 years earlier I knew of one about 400 yards on the other side of it that disappeared. So it's probably a response to that same territory. It's just on this side of it. The next one is right across there. Then we have the one at the Harrison Mills right here, and then across the other, and then around. So it's the territory. Eagles can assess, I guess, pretty easily where food is, and when they decide that's a good supportive area to live in, then they establish a nest there. And so each year that territory attracts either the same eagles back or a new one if one has died.
We've got 10,000 eagles out there.
Yes. But most
where else are they nesting? These guys.
We have to wait, there are lots of questions. So many people here, so hang on.
Probably the eagles that we have nesting in the Fraser Valley, and the odd one might be coming up here on its day off because it's such a nice area to get a banquet for nothing and socialize. Most of these birds, we believe, and that's what our study is going to show, most of these birds are probably northern birds, because there are all the birds that nest in the Yukon, northern and western, eastern Alaska, and Alberta, and northern BC. They've got froze now. There's nothing up there to eat shortly, and so they have to migrate. So they come down here and then go back when it thaws out. So it's a different group of birds. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, one real quick.
Yeah.
This is about hummingbirds, not about eagles.
Oh, there's a man who's just
Hummingbird.
Okay. Predominantly, what I've been filming are Annas and Rufus.
Rufus, yeah.
This man
But I also.
a pawn of yours.
But
is this a stew you put up?
But I also believe I've photographed some ruby-throated in this area.
Okay.
And they look completely different. So I wanted your opinion on the migration or the patterns of ruby-throated hummingbirds.
I don't know that one.
You don't
No,
know?
and I don't know much about
Oh.
my trade either. I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so she had a question. How long does it take for them to migrate from Alaska to here?
How
First
long
question.
does it take to migrate from Alaska to here? Well, we have the odd cracked bird.
Okay, they're talking about migration now. Before they were talking about hummingbirds. Strange enough, what I've been doing.
300, 400, maybe 500
Now they're talking about
miles a
migration.
day.
How far do they migrate? 300 to 400 miles a day. So hang
You
on.
know, here today and really gone tomorrow. I mean, it could be 3 days to Alaska.
And then the second question was, I noticed in North
Planned question. Yes.
people seem to be looking at one eye out of the side of their head, and then there were two shots where they have a binocular effect for depth. So is their eyes and their skull shaped in a way
Yeah, absolutely.
different than other birds? To do that with?
Most birds are able to see binocularly looking ahead, or many can, or monocularly out the sides. And there's obviously a pretty complex brain that lets them switch, but then insects and reptiles can do the same, many of them. Most birds that are predatory, really accurate, it's some need for accuracy of distance and so on, where they're captured.
No, eagles cannot kill a live deer. I can answer that. That's not possible. Only if it's wounded, breaks down, then they can. But they cannot. That's fiction.
Watching for seeds or something out the side. But at home I have a lot of cranes. I breed cranes as well, and they have both. They can look out this way, but they also can hone in on a root or whatever they want, a piece of corn. Both eyes focus. They grab that piece of corn.
So hang on. You'll get your question. 1 second.
Oh yeah, they're both. They're monocular or binocular.
So many people.
They're both, definitely.
Okay, I'm not a stooge about hummingbirds, so
No, okay.
I'll ask you an eagle question.
Yeah.
how much more powerful is a falcon's eyesight than an eagle's?
I think they're probably about the same. Most people, I mean, these are difficult things to analyze, but when they've done that, they're both in that range of 7 to 10 times the visual acuity, usually best defined by...
Asking about sights of eagles and falcons to be very similar.
Yeah, okay.
David, I have a question here. What is the oldest eagle nest that you know?
Oldest eagle nest.
Yeah. You're challenging him.
Yeah, well, I can't. I'm really going back, but when I was Methuselah, probably the oldest nest that I know of is that one I photographed, and that was in that tree, I suspect, for many hundreds of years. Most of the nests that are in deciduous trees, cottonwoods or maples, but mainly cottonwoods, the tree doesn't last. I mean, a big mature cottonwood is about 130, 40, maybe 150 years, and then the tree comes down.
Right, so to be,
see, so so that's a big limiting factor right there. If the tree isn't going to last more than 150 years, you're going to be lucky to get a 50-year nest out of it. But in the big conifers, they can last 1,000 years. So there's possibility of redwood trees having a nest in them for 1,000. I don't know of one, but it's possible. That 650-year-old tree probably had a nest for 500. I mean, that's a pretty good lifetime for a territory, even, because the territory still has to be productive for all that time. Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, I'll just switch quickly. Let me see if I can switch. Well, thanks a lot for your spunky story. Yes, you could see this. Sometimes we had a lot of interruptions with the live stream, so I apologize for that. We're out here on Harrison Mills, and the internet connection is not so great, so I'm using the available Wi-Fi. Okay, so anyway, it's a national treasure. Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yes. Okay, so I'll just switch around again. And thanks a lot. Really wonderful that you joined.